To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Foundation. Vince Rodriguez had built his empire from blood and concrete. At 42, he commanded respect in circles where respect was earned through fear, loyalty, and an iron fist. His construction company, Rodriguez Holdings, was the legitimate face of operations that stretched deep into the underground networks of the city. From labor unions to waste management, from city contracts to private security, Vince's influence ran like steel rebar through the foundation of the metropolitan area. He'd married Linda Hoffman 12 years ago when she was a struggling waitress with dreams bigger than her bank account. Back then, Vince was still climbing, still proving himself to the old guard who questioned whether a second-generation Mexican-American had what it took to run with the wolves. Linda had been beautiful, ambitious, and smart enough to see potential in a man others underestimated. Their home in Westfield Hills reflected Vince's rise. 6,000 square feet of modern luxury on 3 acres, with a circular driveway that curved past manicured gardens. The house was Linda's domain during the day, while Vince handled business that kept their lifestyle comfortable and their enemies at bay. What Linda didn't fully understand was that her husband's success came with unwritten rules. Loyalty was everything. Betrayal was unforgivable. And Vince Rodriguez never forgot a debt, whether owed to him or by him. On this particular Tuesday morning, Linda stood in their marble-clad kitchen, her hands trembling slightly as she ended a phone call. The conversation had been brief but significant. Her lover, Derek Hoffman, her own distant cousin she'd reconnected with at a family reunion, had just confirmed their weekend plans. A hotel in the city, far from prying eyes and Vince's network of associates who seemed to be everywhere. Linda had been careful for 8 months, conducting the affair with military precision. Separate phones, cash payments, alibis involving her sister or shopping trips. She told herself she deserved happiness, that Vince's world of violence and intimidation had made her a prisoner in a golden cage. What she didn't know was that Vince's apparent obliviousness was itself a performance. Years of surviving in an environment where weakness meant death had taught him to observe everything while revealing nothing. He'd noticed the new perfume, the unexplained credit card charges that didn't match her claimed activities, the way she checked her phone with nervous energy. But Vince was patient. His grandfather, who'd crossed from Sonora with nothing but calloused hands and iron determination, had taught him that revenge was a dish best served with perfect preparation. You didn't strike until you understood every angle, every consequence, every way your enemy might try to escape. The black Audi Q7 sat in the garage like a sleeping predator. Linda had insisted on the SUV, safer for their non-existent children, she'd claimed, though they'd stopped trying years ago when it became clear their marriage was more business arrangement than love story. Today, she'd be driving it to her supposed book club meeting, which was actually a cover for meeting Derek at a downtown cafe. As Vince reviewed construction contracts in his study, surrounded by awards from city officials and photos with politicians whose campaigns he'd quietly funded, he allowed himself a thin smile. Linda thought she was playing chess, but she didn't even realize the game had begun. Chapter 2. The Collision. Derek Hoffman was everything Vince Rodriguez wasn't, or at least, everything Linda wished her husband could be. Tall, blonde, and conventionally handsome, Derek worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, traveling through upscale medical offices and making small talk about golf handicaps and vacation destinations. He wore khakis and polo shirts like armor against a world that valued appearance over substance. At 36, Derek had stumbled through a series of failed relationships and mediocre jobs before reconnecting with Linda. She represented everything he'd been taught to want: beauty, wealth, and access to a lifestyle his modest salary could never provide. He didn't ask many questions about how Vince had acquired his fortune. He preferred to imagine it came from legitimate business deals and smart investments. The affair had started innocently enough. Family barbecue conversations about old times had shifted to private text messages about Linda's unhappiness. Derek positioned himself as the understanding confidant, the gentle soul who truly saw her. He conveniently ignored the fact that Linda's marriage had funded his cousin's medical school loans and helped his own mother through cancer treatment when Derek's insurance had fallen short. That Tuesday afternoon, Derek was driving his silver Honda Civic toward their meeting point when his phone buzzed with Linda's voice message. She was running late. Something about Vince needing the Audi for a business meeting. Could they push their coffee date back an hour? Derek made the mistake of trying to respond while navigating traffic. His attention split between the phone screen and the road ahead. He didn't notice the red light until impact was inevitable. The Civic slammed into the side of a black Audi Q7 that had been proceeding legally through the intersection. The sound of twisted metal and shattering glass brought immediate attention from pedestrians and nearby drivers. Steam rose from Derek's crumpled hood, while the Audi's passenger side bore a significant dent and spiderwebbed windows. Linda climbed out of the driver's seat, her designer jacket torn and a thin line of blood running from a cut on her forehead. The shock of the accident lasted approximately 10 seconds before panic set in. Not about injuries, the damage was minor, but about explanations. Derek stumbled from his car, his face pale and eyes wide with recognition and terror. If this got back to Vince, if the accident report connected him to Linda in any way, the consequences would extend far beyond insurance claims. "Are you hurt?" Derek asked, approaching carefully as concerned bystanders began gathering. Linda's mind raced through possibilities. She could claim she didn't know Derek, that he was just another careless driver. But the accident report would include both their information, and in a city where Vince's network spread like morning fog, secrets had short lifespans. Unless the sound of approaching sirens made her decision. When Officer Timothy Brennan arrived on scene, a 15-year veteran with the traffic division who'd seen enough accidents to spot lies from 50 yards, Linda was ready with her story. "Thank God you're here," she said, injecting tears into her voice with practiced ease. "This maniac came out of nowhere. My husband was driving. He's always drunk by afternoon. I tried to stop him, but he never listens." Officer Brennan looked around the scene, noting the damage patterns and the position of both vehicles. Something felt off about the woman's account, but domestic situations involving intoxicated drivers required careful handling. "Where is your husband now, ma'am?" Linda gestured vaguely toward the intersection. "He ran off when he heard the sirens. Left me here to deal with this mess, like always. I'm Linda Rodriguez. This is all going to come back on me because of his drinking problem." Chapter 3, The Revelation. Officer Brennan had been documenting the accident scene when Vince Rodriguez arrived. He'd received Linda's panic call 15 minutes after the collision, a call where she tearfully explained that someone had hit their car while she was driving to her book club. Could he please come quickly? Vince had left his meeting with city contractors and driven directly to the scene, his mind already analyzing the situation. Linda's voice had carried notes of fear that seemed disproportionate to a simple fender bender. And her explanation, that she'd been alone in the car, conflicted with what his instincts told him about the scene he was approaching. He parked his black Escalade across the street and observed for several minutes before approaching. Linda stood beside the damaged Audi, speaking animatedly to a police officer while gesturing toward a silver Honda with a familiar figure beside it. Derek Hoffman, the same Derek who'd been asking suspiciously specific questions about Linda's schedule at recent family gatherings. As Vince walked toward the scene, he caught fragments of Linda's performance. "Always drunk. Never takes responsibility. Left me here." Officer Brennan was in the middle of taking Linda's statement when Vince approached and handed over his driver's license without being asked. "I'm Vincent Rodriguez. This is my vehicle and my wife. I understand there's been an accident." Brennan glanced at the license, then did a double take. His expression shifted from routine professionalism to something approaching anxiety. Vincent Rodriguez wasn't just another citizen. He was the Vincent Rodriguez, the man whose construction company had built half the municipal buildings in the city, the man whose charity donations funded police benevolent associations and whose political connections reached the mayor's office. More importantly, Officer Brennan had seen the departmental memos about individuals who required special consideration during interactions. Rodriguez's name appeared on lists that patrol officers were advised to memorize. "Sir, I'm so sorry. I had no idea," Brennan said, his voice shifting to a tone reserved for judges, district attorneys, and people who could make careers disappear with a phone call. Linda watched this transformation with growing confusion. The officer's entire demeanor had changed upon seeing Vince's identification. This wasn't the reaction of someone dealing with the drunk, irresponsible husband she'd described. "Ma'am," Officer Brennan said, turning to Linda with barely concealed irritation. "Do you realize who your husband is?" Linda looked between Vince and the officer, her mind struggling to process the shift in dynamics. "He's nobody special," she said slowly, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. Officer Brennan shook his head, his training in diplomatic handling of sensitive situations warring with his annoyance at being misled. "Ma'am, your husband is Vincent Rodriguez. He's one of the most respected businessmen in the city. His company has built most of our infrastructure projects, and he's a major contributor to city services." The officer paused, realizing he was revealing more than policy recommended, but the damage was done. Linda's face had gone pale as the implications of her lie became clear. She'd painted Vince as an irresponsible drunk to a police officer who knew exactly who he was and what he represented. Derek Hoffman stood frozen beside his damaged Honda, watching the scene unfold with growing horror. He'd known Linda's husband was successful, but the officer's reaction suggested influence that extended far beyond construction contracts and charity donations. Vince remained silent throughout the exchange, his dark eyes moving between Linda, Derek, and Officer Brennan with predatory patience. He'd learned long ago that people revealed more when allowed to speak than when pressed for answers. "I think there's been some confusion about the details of this accident," Vince said finally, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My wife was obviously shaken by the collision. Perhaps we should focus on the facts rather than speculation about fault." Officer Brennan nodded eagerly, grateful for the diplomatic exit from an increasingly awkward situation. "Absolutely, Mr. Rodriguez. Based on the damage patterns and witness statements, it appears the Honda ran the red light. Clear case of failure to yield right-of-way." As Derek received his citation and the vehicles were cleared from the intersection, Vince made note of every detail. The nervous glances between Linda and Derek, the way they avoided looking at each other directly while remaining hyper-aware of each other's positions, the practiced nature of Linda's lies, and the amateur panic in Derek's responses. Most importantly, he noted how quickly Linda had been willing to destroy his reputation to protect her secret. That level of betrayal required careful consideration of appropriate responses. The ride home in the Escalade passed in silence. Linda stared out the passenger window, her mind racing through damage control strategies. Vince drove with his usual calm precision, giving no indication that anything significant had occurred. But behind his composed exterior, Vincent Rodriguez was already planning. He'd built an empire by understanding that loyalty was earned and betrayal was punished. Personal relationships followed the same rules as business partnerships. Trust was currency, and counterfeit currency required decisive action. The game had begun. Chapter 4: The Investigation. 2 weeks passed before Vince made his first move. To outside observers, the accident seemed forgotten. The Audi was repaired, insurance companies handled their paperwork, and life in the Rodriguez household continued its normal patterns. Linda attended her book clubs and shopping excursions. Derek returned to his pharmaceutical sales routes, and Vince maintained his schedule of construction meetings and municipal contract negotiations. But beneath the surface, Vince was conducting an investigation with the thoroughness of a federal prosecutor. His network of contacts included private investigators, former police detectives who'd retired into corporate security, and specialists in digital surveillance who operated in the gray areas between legal and expedient. Miguel Santos had worked for Vince for 8 years, handling research projects that required discretion and patience. A former Army intelligence officer with skills in both digital forensics and old-fashioned surveillance, Miguel understood that his employer's requests often involved personal rather than business matters. The pay was excellent, the work was interesting, and asking unnecessary questions wasn't part of the job description. "I need a complete timeline on my wife's activities for the past year," Vince had told Miguel during a private meeting at a downtown parking garage. "Phone records, credit card transactions, social media activity, location tracking. Everything." "How deep do you want me to go?" Miguel had asked, understanding the implications. "All the way. And I want the same workup on Derek Hoffman, her cousin. Pharmaceutical sales, lives in Brookfield Heights, drives a silver Honda Civic with front-end damage." Miguel nodded. "Timeline for results." 2 weeks. Money is no object, but this stays between us. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning in a manila envelope delivered to Vince's private office. 47 pages of documentation that told a story of systematic deception spanning 8 months. Hotel receipts paid in cash, but captured by security cameras. Cell phone location data showing Linda and Derek in the same places at times when Linda claimed to be elsewhere. Credit card purchases of clothing and accessories that never appeared in her wardrobe at home. But the most damaging evidence was digital. Miguel's cybersecurity contacts had recovered deleted text messages, email chains, and even voicemail recordings that painted a detailed picture of the affair. Linda and Derek hadn't just been meeting for physical encounters. They'd been planning a future that involved Linda leaving her marriage once she'd secured a sufficient financial settlement. The conversations revealed Linda's contempt for Vince's business associates, her plans to claim emotional abuse during divorce proceedings, and her intention to move to Derek's home state of Colorado, where they could start fresh with what she called her fair share of Vince's assets. More interesting were Derek's contributions to these conversations. Far from being a passive participant, he'd been researching Linda's legal rights in divorce proceedings and had even consulted with attorneys about asset protection strategies. The man who presented himself as a simple pharmaceutical salesman had been conducting his own investigation into Vince's business holdings. Vince read through the documentation twice, his expression never changing. The betrayal was comprehensive, not just adultery, but active planning to destroy him financially and personally. Linda and Derek had underestimated him completely, treating him like a wealthy but stupid mark rather than someone who'd survived and thrived in environments where mistakes were often fatal. The final section of Miguel's report contained background information on Derek Hoffman that explained his confidence in pursuing a married woman. Derek's pharmaceutical sales position provided access to medical offices throughout the region, including several clinics that served Vince's construction workers. Derek had been using these connections to gather information about Vince's business practices, employee satisfaction, and potential vulnerabilities. More damaging was Derek's history. 3 previous relationships with married women, 2 of which had ended in expensive divorce settlements that Derek had benefited from indirectly. The man was a professional predator who specialized in targeting wealthy wives and helping them extract maximum value from their marriages. Vince set the report aside and opened his laptop. His calendar showed meetings with city officials, union representatives, and potential investors stretching through the next month. Legitimate business that required his attention and maintained the income streams that supported his lifestyle and influence. But starting today, those business activities would serve a dual purpose. Every meeting would be an opportunity to gather resources. Every contract negotiation would include considerations for future needs, and every conversation would be evaluated for potential value in settling personal debts. Vincent Rodriguez was going to war, but unlike his enemies, he understood that the best battles were won before the other side realized they were fighting. Chapter 5. Building Alliances. Vince's first strategic move involved reconnecting with old associates whose loyalty had been tested over years of mutual benefit. Tony Morales ran a waste management company that serviced most of the metropolitan area's commercial districts. Their relationship dated back 12 years to when Vince had helped Tony secure his first major municipal contract. The meeting took place at Tony's compound in South Hills, a sprawling property that housed both his legitimate business operations and personal residence. Tony maintained his own security, his own rules, and his own methods of handling problems that fell outside conventional legal remedies. "Vincent, good to see you," Tony said, embracing Vince in the traditional manner. "It's been too long since you've visited." They sat in Tony's private office, surrounded by awards from environmental organizations and photos with mayors and city council members. Tony's legitimate business generated substantial revenue and employed over 200 people. But his core operations remained rooted in the old neighborhood values of loyalty, respect, and decisive action against those who violated trust. "I have a personal matter that requires careful handling," Vince explained. "My wife has been unfaithful. The situation involves plans to damage me financially and professionally." Tony's expression hardened. He'd met Linda Rodriguez at various social functions and had always questioned her commitment to her husband's world. "How can I help? I need resources for a comprehensive response." transportation, secure locations, and personnel who understand the importance of discretion. Consider it done. What timeline are we working with? Several weeks of preparation, then rapid execution. The goal is complete removal of the problems from my life. Tony nodded. In their world, marriages were partnerships that extended beyond personal relationships. Attacks on one partner were attacks on the entire network of relationships and mutual obligations. Linda's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was an assault on the structure that kept their community stable and prosperous. Vince's second meeting was with Carmen Delgado, who operated the region's most successful private security firm. Carmen had served 3 tours in Iraq before returning home to discover that her military skills translated perfectly to corporate protection services. Her company provided security for high-profile executives, witnesses in sensitive legal cases, and individuals who required protection from threats that law enforcement couldn't adequately address. I need a team for a domestic situation, Vince told Carmen during their lunch meeting at an upscale restaurant downtown. Multiple targets, complex logistics, and absolute confidentiality. Carmen had worked with Vince on several business-related security matters. She understood his reputation and the importance of maintaining professional relationships with people who paid well and never asked her people to take unnecessary risks. Personnel count and duration? For people for approximately 1 week of active operations. Preparation time flexible. Payment in cash upon completion. Standard rates apply, plus a confidentiality bonus. We'll need operational details 48 hours before execution. The third piece of Vince's network involved his relationship with Judge Patricia Hoffman, Derek's aunt, and a family court magistrate with 23 years on the bench. Judge Hoffman was known for her tough but fair approach to domestic relations cases, particularly those involving asset division and custody arrangements. What most people didn't know was that Judge Hoffman's son had been arrested for drunk driving 3 years earlier. The charges had been reduced through the intervention of an attorney who specialized in representing city employees and who happened to be on Vince's payroll. Judge Hoffman had never been told about this arrangement, but she understood that certain courtesies were sometimes extended to family members of respected community figures. Vince's meeting with Judge Hoffman took place in her chambers on a Friday afternoon. The conversation was carefully structured to remain within legal boundaries while ensuring that certain information was properly conveyed. Your Honor, I wanted to discuss a family matter that may eventually require court attention, Vince began. My wife has been having an affair with your nephew Derek. I have substantial documentation of their relationship and their plans to pursue an aggressive divorce strategy. Judge Hoffman's face remained neutral, but Vince could see the concern in her eyes. Family scandals involving court personnel created ethical complications and unwanted attention. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, Mr. Rodriguez. If such a matter comes before the court system, I would naturally recuse myself due to family connections. Of course, I wanted to ensure that you were aware of the situation before any filings occurred. I believe in transparency when family relationships intersect with legal proceedings. The message was clear. Vince possessed detailed evidence of Derek's involvement with Linda, and that evidence could become public record if the situation proceeded through conventional divorce proceedings. Judge Hoffman would want to minimize her family's exposure to scandal, and Vince was offering her the opportunity to handle the matter privately. By the end of the second week, Vince had assembled resources that included security personnel, transportation, secure facilities, and legal protection. His network understood that Vincent Rodriguez was calling in favors, and they responded with the loyalty that had been built through years of mutual support and shared prosperity. Linda and Derek continued their affair, unaware that their communications were being monitored and their plans were being documented. They believed they were operating in secret, planning a future that would destroy Vince while enriching themselves. But they were actually performing for an audience of one. A man who understood that betrayal required consequences, and who possessed both the resources and the patience to ensure those consequences were comprehensive and permanent. Chapter 6. The Setup. The plan Vince developed was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its scope. Rather than simply exposing the affair or pursuing conventional divorce proceedings, he would create a situation where Linda and Derek would destroy themselves while believing they were achieving their goals. The key was Derek's weakness for shortcuts and Linda's assumption that Vince was too trusting to discover their betrayal. Both had underestimated their opponent, and Vince intended to use their overconfidence against them. Miguel Santos received new instructions during their third meeting. "I want you to create a false investment opportunity," Vince explained. "Something that appears extremely profitable but requires immediate cash investment. Market it specifically to Derek Hoffman through channels he'll trust." "What kind of investment?" Miguel asked. "Pharmaceutical distribution rights for a new arthritis medication. Derek's background makes him a natural target, and the medical field is full of legitimate opportunities that can be mimicked convincingly." Miguel nodded. Creating false business opportunities was more art than science, requiring realistic documentation, credible testimonials, and timing that felt natural rather than convenient. Timeline and budget. 2 weeks to establish credibility, then rapid deployment. Derek needs to believe he's discovered an exclusive opportunity that will fund his new life with Linda. The pharmaceutical scheme required substantial preparation. Miguel's team created a fictitious company called MedTech Distribution Partners, complete with professional website, corporate documentation, and references from doctors who were actually Carmen Delgado's security personnel using false identities. The investment opportunity was structured to appeal specifically to Derek's background and current financial situation. MedTech claimed to have secured exclusive distribution rights for a revolutionary arthritis medication that was about to receive FDA approval. Early investors could purchase distribution territories for $150,000 each, with projected returns of 300% within the first year. Derek received initial contact through a former colleague who'd been recruited for the operation. The approach was subtle, a casual mention of a lucrative opportunity during a pharmaceutical conference, followed by confidential documentation that Derek had to promise not to share. Linda became involved when Derek shared the investment details during one of their hotel meetings. The opportunity seemed too good to miss, but Derek's savings and credit lines could only cover $75,000 of the required investment. Linda suggested they could access the remaining funds through her emergency accounts, money she'd been quietly accumulating from her household budget over several years. What neither Linda nor Derek realized was that Vince had been monitoring Linda's hidden accounts for months. He knew exactly how much money she'd saved and how she planned to access it. More importantly, he knew that once Linda withdrew the funds for Derek's investment, she would be committing herself to a course of action that would be impossible to reverse. The timing was crucial. Vince wanted Linda and Derek to make their investment commitment during a week when he would be attending a construction industry conference in Las Vegas. His absence would give them confidence to move forward without fear of immediate discovery. Carmen Delgado's security team began surveillance of Derek's activities 2 weeks before the planned deployment. They documented his daily routines, identified his regular locations, and established patterns that would be useful for the final phase of operations. "Target maintains regular schedule," Carmen reported during a briefing meeting. "Apartment in Brookfield Heights, office in the medical district, 3 regular restaurants for client meetings. No unusual security awareness or countermeasures." "Personal relationships outside the primary affair?" Vince asked. "Ex-girlfriend who still calls occasionally, mother in assisted living, and a brother in Phoenix who he speaks with monthly. No close friends or confidants who might interfere with operations." Tony Morales had prepared facilities for the final confrontation. A warehouse in the industrial district that was officially vacant but actually served as a secure meeting location for sensitive business discussions. The building provided privacy, soundproofing, and multiple exit routes, all necessary features for conversations that required absolute confidentiality. "Everything is ready when you give the word," Tony confirmed. Personnel, transportation, and cleanup services all standing by. The warehouse had been equipped with recording equipment, restraint systems, and medical supplies. Whatever happened during the final confrontation, there would be complete documentation and professional handling of any complications. Judge Hoffman received a courtesy call informing her that Derek was about to become involved in a financial investment that might prove problematic. The conversation was brief and carefully worded to avoid any appearance of judicial interference in private business matters. "I thought you should be aware that Derek may be making some financial decisions that could reflect poorly on family members in public positions," Vince had explained. "I wanted to give you advance notice in case the situation becomes public." Judge Hoffman understood the implications. If Derek's investment proved fraudulent or legally questionable, the scandal could damage her own reputation and career. She appreciated Vince's consideration in providing advance warning, and she understood that discretion would benefit everyone involved. By the end of the preparation phase, Vince had created a perfect trap. Linda and Derek would voluntarily commit their resources to a fraudulent investment, making them vulnerable to both financial ruin and criminal charges. They would be isolated from potential allies and supporters, trapped in a situation entirely of their own making. Most importantly, they would learn exactly who Vincent Rodriguez was and what happened to people who betrayed his trust. The lesson would be comprehensive, permanent, and absolutely unforgettable. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. Derek Hoffman signed the MedTech Distribution Partners investment agreement on a Wednesday morning, transferring $150,000 to an account that would disappear within hours. He used Linda's emergency savings combined with a loan against his Honda and a cash advance from 3 credit cards to meet the investment requirement. Linda had withdrawn her hidden funds 2 days earlier, telling Vince she needed money for a furniture purchase that turned out to be delayed. The lie came easily. She'd been practicing deception for months and felt confident in her ability to manage multiple false narratives. What Linda and Derek didn't realize was that Miguel Santos had been monitoring their communications and financial transactions in real time. The moment Derek's wire transfer was processed, Vince received confirmation that his trap had been successfully triggered. Investment completed, Miguel reported during an encrypted phone call. Both targets are now financially committed and legally exposed. Vince was in Las Vegas, attending legitimate construction industry meetings while maintaining perfect alibis for his location and activities. But his absence from the city was temporary. He would return Thursday evening to begin the final phase of operations. Derek called Linda within an hour of completing the investment, his voice carrying excitement and relief. "It's done. We're officially partners in what's going to be the most profitable opportunity of our lives." Linda felt a mixture of thrill and terror. She'd just committed $75,000 to an investment based entirely on Derek's research and judgment. But the potential returns were staggering, and success would provide them with financial independence to start their new life together. "When do we see the first returns?" Linda asked. "According to the timeline, FDA approval should come through within 6 weeks. Distribution territories will be assigned immediately after that, and revenue sharing begins within 90 days. Neither of them considered the possibility that MedTech Distribution Partners was an elaborate fiction created specifically to exploit their greed and desperation. They'd been so focused on the opportunity to escape their current situations that they'd ignored basic due diligence about the company and its claims. Thursday evening, Derek received a phone call that changed everything. The voice was calm, professional, and completely unfamiliar. "Mr. Hoffman, this is Marcus Webb from the Securities and Exchange Commission. We need to speak with you immediately regarding your recent investment with MedTech Distribution Partners." Derek's blood went cold. "I'm sorry, what is this about?" "Sir, MedTech Distribution Partners is currently under federal investigation for securities fraud. We have evidence that you and several other investors have been victims of an elaborate scheme. We need you to come to our field office immediately to provide testimony and documentation." "Are you saying the investment is fraudulent?" "Sir, I can't discuss the details over the phone, but I need you to understand that your cooperation with this investigation may be your only opportunity to recover your invested funds and avoid criminal charges as an accessory." Derek hung up the phone with shaking hands. His entire future, the money, the life with Linda, the escape from mediocrity, had just evaporated in a single phone call. Worse, he was apparently facing potential criminal charges for participating in securities fraud. Linda received her own call 30 minutes later. The voice was female, equally professional, and just as terrifying. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is Agent Sarah Kim from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We need to speak with you regarding financial transactions you've made in connection with Derek Hoffman and MedTech Distribution Partners." "I don't understand. What financial transactions?" "Ma'am, we have evidence that you provided funds for an investment scheme that's currently under federal investigation. Your cooperation with our investigation is essential, and we need to meet with you immediately." Linda's mind raced through possibilities. If the FBI was investigating Derek's investment, They would discover the source of the funds and her attempts to hide money from Vince. Her affair would be exposed, her financial deception would be revealed, and her marriage would be destroyed, all for an investment that was apparently fraudulent. "Where do you want to meet?" Linda asked, her voice barely steady. "We have a secure facility in the industrial district where we can discuss this matter privately. The address is 1247 Industrial Boulevard, Building C. Come alone, and don't discuss this conversation with anyone, including your husband, until after we've had a chance to explain the situation." Derek received similar instructions to meet at the same location. Neither he nor Linda realized they were being directed to Tony Morales' warehouse, or that the federal agents they'd spoken with were Carmen Delgado's security personnel using sophisticated voice modification equipment. The warehouse looked exactly like what someone would expect from a federal field office. Unmarked cars in the parking lot, professional-looking personnel in suits, and official-seeming documentation visible through the windows. Carmen's team had transformed the space into a convincing government facility complete with recording equipment and interrogation rooms. Derek arrived first, his hands still shaking as he was escorted into a sterile conference room by a man who introduced himself as Agent Webb. Linda arrived 20 minutes later, led to a separate room by a woman claiming to be Agent Kim. Both were shown identical evidence packages, financial records documenting their investment in medtech distribution partners, witness statements from other alleged victims, and official-looking documents describing the federal investigation into securities fraud. The evidence was convincing because most of it was real. Vince's team had actually created the fraudulent investment scheme specifically to trap Linda and Derek. "The good news," Agent Webb told Derek, "is that we believe you and Mrs. Rodriguez were victims rather than willing participants in this fraud. The bad news is that your financial losses are probably permanent, and your involvement may still result in civil liability." Agent Kim delivered a similar message to Linda in the adjacent room. "Your husband is obviously a prominent businessman with significant political connections. If this investigation becomes public, the scandal could damage his reputation and your family's standing in the community." Both Derek and Linda were told that their best option was to cooperate fully with the investigation while minimizing public exposure of their involvement. They were asked to sign confidentiality agreements and to avoid discussing the matter with anyone, including each other, until the federal investigation was completed. What they didn't realize was that they'd just signed confessions to their affair, their financial deception, and their participation in investment fraud. The documents they'd been shown were real evidence of their actions, compiled by Vince's team over weeks of surveillance and investigation. As Derek and Linda left the warehouse separately, each believing they'd narrowly avoided federal prosecution, Vince was receiving detailed reports on their reactions and statements. The trap had worked perfectly. They'd confessed to everything, signed legal documents acknowledging their guilt, and agreed to maintain silence about their situation. Phase 1 of their punishment was complete. Phase 2 would begin immediately. Chapter 8. The Reckoning begins. Vince returned from Las Vegas on Friday morning to find his house eerily quiet. Linda was in the kitchen, staring at a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. Her face was pale, her hands trembled slightly, and she looked like someone who'd seen her entire future collapse in a single phone call. "Good trip?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Productive. Several new contracts in development." Vince poured himself coffee and sat across from her at the granite breakfast bar. "You seem upset about something." Linda's mind raced through possible responses. The confidentiality agreement she'd signed prohibited her from discussing the federal investigation, but she needed some explanation for her obvious distress. "Just tired. I think I'm coming down with something." Vince nodded sympathetically. "Maybe you should rest today. Cancel any plans you might have had." The suggestion felt more like a command, and Linda realized she had no plans to cancel anyway. Her affair with Derek was effectively over. They'd been instructed to avoid contact with each other pending the federal investigation. Their dreams of a new life together had been replaced by fears of criminal prosecution and financial ruin. What Linda didn't know was that Vince had spent the morning reviewing surveillance footage from the warehouse meeting. He'd watched her sign confessions, heard her voice breaking as she described her affair, and seen her complete psychological breakdown when confronted with the consequences of her betrayal. Derek was having his own crisis 20 miles away in his Brookfield Heights apartment. The $150,000 investment represented every available dollar he possessed plus significant debt from credit cards and personal loans. He was financially ruined, potentially facing criminal charges, and prohibited from contacting the one person who might have provided emotional support during the disaster. His phone rang at 10:47 a.m. The caller ID showed Vincent Rodriguez. Derek's hands shook as he answered. "Hello. Derek, this is Vince Rodriguez. I think we need to have a conversation." What about?" "About your relationship with my wife. About the investment you made yesterday. About the federal investigation you're both involved in." Vince's voice was calm, almost conversational. "I think it would be better if we discussed this in person rather than over the phone." Derek's mind reeled. If Vince knew about the affair, the investment, and the federal investigation, then the confidentiality agreements Derek had signed were meaningless. Worse, Vince's connections and influence suggested he might have resources that federal agents couldn't protect against. "Where do you want to meet?" "I'll pick you up in 30 minutes. Be ready." The line went dead, leaving Derek staring at his phone in terror. Vincent Rodriguez wasn't just an angry husband. He was a man with the power to make problems disappear permanently. Vince's black Escalade arrived precisely on schedule. Derek watched from his apartment window as two men got out. One the driver, the other clearly security. When Derek opened his apartment door, he found himself facing Tony Morales, who smiled with predatory politeness. "Derek Hoffman? Mr. Rodriguez is waiting in the car. We're going for a ride." The drive took 45 minutes through city streets Derek had never seen. They passed through industrial areas, empty lots, and neighborhoods where broken streetlights and boarded windows suggested that police patrols were infrequent and witnesses were rare. The Escalade stopped at a warehouse complex in the same area where Derek had met with federal agents the day before. But this was a different building, and the men who escorted him inside were definitely not law enforcement. Vince was waiting in what looked like a conference room, but the setting felt more like a tribunal than a business meeting. He sat behind a metal table with file folders arranged precisely in front of him. Two additional men stood near the walls, professional, alert, and clearly prepared for violence if necessary. "Sit down, Derek." Derek took the single chair facing Vince across the table. His legs were shaking, and he had to grip the chair arms to keep his hands steady. "Let's start with what you think you know," Vince said, opening the first file folder. "You believe you're involved in a federal investigation of securities fraud. You believe you and Linda were victims of an investment scam. You believe you're cooperating with law enforcement to minimize your legal exposure." Derek nodded, afraid to speak. "All of that is false." Vince removed a series of photographs from the folder, surveillance images of Derek and Linda entering hotels, meeting at restaurants, and embracing in parking lots. "What's true is that you've been having an affair with my wife for 8 months. What's true is that you invested $150,000 in a fraudulent company that I created specifically to trap you. What's true is that there is no federal investigation. You confessed to everything yesterday to my people." Derek felt the room spinning around him. "Your people? The federal agents you spoke with work for me. The warehouse where you met is mine. The evidence you signed acknowledging your guilt is real, but it's not going to any government agency. It's staying with me." Vince opened the second folder, revealing financial records showing Derek's complete fiscal destruction. "Your investment money is gone forever. Your credit is ruined. Your job will disappear when your employer learns about your relationship with a married client's wife. And your family will discover exactly what kind of man you really are." "What do you want?" Derek whispered. "I want you to understand something very important. You tried to steal my wife, destroy my marriage, and steal my money. You treated me like a fool who wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. You were wrong about everything." Vince closed the folders and leaned forward. "You have two choices. Choice 1. You disappear from this city immediately and permanently. You never contact Linda again, never return to this area, and never speak to anyone about what happened here. In exchange, I won't pursue criminal charges for fraud, and I won't share information about your activities with your family." "What's choice 2? Vince smiled, and Derek felt ice water in his veins. "Choice 2 is that you don't leave voluntarily, and I handle this situation using methods that don't involve your cooperation." Derek understood he was being offered a chance to run for his life. "How long do I have?" 72 hours. "Pack light. You won't be coming back." Two of Tony's men escorted Derek back to his apartment. He had 3 days to liquidate his remaining possessions, terminate his lease, and disappear forever. If he was still in the city after Sunday night, Vincent Rodriguez would consider their agreement void. Derek began packing immediately. Chapter 9, Final Justice. Linda was waiting in the living room when Vince returned home that evening. She'd spent the day in a state of suspended terror, knowing that her world was collapsing but uncertain about the exact timeline or method of destruction. "We need to talk," Vince said, settling into his leather chair across from where Linda sat on the couch. "I don't know what you think you know, but—" "Stop." Vince's voice carried absolute authority. "I know about Derek. I know about the hotels, the money you stole from our accounts, and the investment you made yesterday. I know about your plans to leave me and take as much of my money as possible. I know everything." Linda's face crumpled. 8 months of careful deception had been pointless. Vince had been watching, documenting, and planning while she'd believed herself cleverly hidden. "The affair is over," Vince continued. "Derek is leaving the city permanently. The investment money is gone forever. Your secret accounts have been frozen. And your marriage to me ends tonight." "Vince, please." "No. You made your choices. You decided I was an obstacle to overcome rather than a partner to respect. You decided my trust was worthless and my marriage vows meant nothing. You decided to steal from me while planning to destroy me." Vince opened a manila envelope and spread documents across the coffee table. "Divorce papers. Division of assets according to our prenuptial agreement, which you seem to have forgotten about in your excitement over Derek's investment scheme." Linda stared at the papers in horror. Their prenuptial agreement, signed when she was a waitress grateful for financial security, gave her virtually nothing in case of divorce due to adultery. She would receive $50,000 and 30 days to vacate the house. Everything else, the house, the cars, the bank accounts, the investment portfolios, remained with Vince. "I won't sign these." "Yes, you will. Because if you don't, I'll file criminal charges for theft of marital assets and fraud. I'll also release the video recordings of your confession to federal agents, which were actually my security personnel, along with documentation of your affair and financial deception." Vince placed a tablet on the table showing surveillance footage from Derek's apartment building. "Derek is packing right now. He understands that his choices are to leave the city permanently or face consequences that extend beyond legal prosecution. You have the same choice. You're destroying my life over a mistake." "No, Linda. You destroyed your own life by treating our marriage like a criminal enterprise instead of a partnership. I'm just refusing to be a victim of your choices." Linda signed the divorce papers with shaking hands, her tears making wet spots on the legal documents. Vince witnessed her signature and placed the completed paperwork in his briefcase. "You have 48 hours to pack your personal belongings and leave this house. A moving company will arrive Monday to collect anything you don't take with you. After that, this house will be off limits to you permanently. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. But I suggest you avoid trying to contact Derek. He won't be available to help you start your new life together." Linda spent the weekend packing 12 years of marriage into cardboard boxes. Her designer clothes, jewelry, and personal items filled her sedan and a small rental truck. Everything else, the furniture she'd chosen, the artwork she'd collected, the lifestyle she'd enjoyed, remained behind as reminders of what she'd thrown away. Derek's departure was more dramatic. He sold his car to a used car dealership for $8,000, terminated his apartment lease with a substantial penalty, and booked a one-way ticket to Phoenix where his brother lived. He left the city on Sunday afternoon with 2 suitcases and less than $10,000 to start over. His pharmaceutical sales career was finished. Vince's network ensured that Derek's professional reputation was destroyed throughout the medical community. His family received anonymous packages containing evidence of his affair and his role in defrauding Linda out of her savings. His credit rating collapsed under the weight of defaulted loans and unpaid obligations. Linda's exit was quieter but equally comprehensive. She moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in a different city, using her $50,000 settlement to cover deposits and basic living expenses. Her attempts to find employment were complicated by reference checks that revealed her involvement in a marriage that ended due to adultery and financial misconduct. Both Linda and Derek had underestimated Vincent Rodriguez completely. They'd seen wealth and assumed stupidity, observed patience and mistaken it for weakness, and believed that betrayal would be rewarded rather than punished. 6 months later, Vince received updates on both of his former adversaries. Derek was working in a Phoenix call center for $12 per hour, living in a studio apartment, and avoiding contact with his family due to shame over his actions. Linda was employed as a night shift clerk at a discount hotel, struggling to pay rent and utilities from her minimum wage income. Neither had contacted the other since leaving the city. Their dreams of building a new life together had died along with their financial resources and social standing. Vince's life, meanwhile, had improved considerably. His business continued to prosper, his political connections remained strong, and his reputation for loyalty and decisive action had been enhanced by how thoroughly he'd handled personal betrayal. He'd proven that Vincent Rodriguez protected what was his and punished those who tried to take it. The house in Westfield Hills remained his sanctuary, but now it was free from deception and betrayal. Vince had learned that trust was earned, loyalty was precious, and forgiveness was a luxury he couldn't afford. He'd also learned that the best revenge wasn't temporary pain. It was permanent consequences that reminded his enemies every day of the price they'd paid for underestimating him. Vincent Rodriguez had won completely, and his enemies would spend the rest of their lives understanding exactly what that meant. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.